I'm JJ Heller, and this is Instrumental, a show about the big and small moments that shape our lives. In every episode, my guest and I start near the end of their story and work our way back to the beginning. I hope our conversation reminds you that every second matters, because none of us knows which moment will be the one that changes everything.
Big love happens in the small moments.
Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Instrumental. I'm JJ Heller.
I'm Dave Heller.
And we're so glad that you're here.
Yeah, what she said.
Today, we get to introduce you to our friend, Andrew Osenga. And Andrew is actually one of the very first people we met in Nashville.
Way back in 2005, we were young.
We're still young, Dave.
Yeah, we're very young 40-year-olds. I mean, like, relative to, like, a redwood, we're saplings. I almost peed my pants.
Okay, let's talk about Andrew a little bit more. Also, you're kind of turning red.
Oh, gosh. So the reason why a lot of you will know Andrew is because he has a podcast called The Pivot.
I love his podcast.
Yeah, it's about major changes that have occurred in people's lives. And you've even been a guest on The Pivot.
I know. Well, and when I was on his show, he asked me if I thought that my experience with anxiety had any connection to the fact that I write lullabies. And I had never thought of that before. And it's so true. And it made me realize that a big reason why I write lullabies is because I need to hear those words myself. And none of those songs would exist if it weren't for my anxiety.
Well, thanks, Andrew, for pointing that out. That was very nice of you.
I know. Super insightful.
And one of the things people may not know about Andrew, if they only know him from his podcast, is that he was an electric guitarist for a really long time. He played in a band called The Normals. He also played in a band called Caedmon's Call. And he also played on several of your records, JJ.
Yeah, and he's also an incredible songwriter.
And we've written a couple of great songs with him, too.
And he's made a few of his own records that are amazing.
He's written some really good songs without our help as well.
I know, he's just one of those guys who's kind of good at everything.
And now he works at a record label using his expertise to bring up the next generation of artists. I love it.
Me too.
I don't know about you, JJ, but I'm ready to hear more about Andrew's story.
Yes, I'm ready. Here we go. Act 3, True, Useful, Kind. There's a certain type of wisdom that only comes with experience. After living through the unique ups and downs of being a self-employed touring musician and producer, Andrew now finds himself in a place where he can use his special skill set to provide perspective and guidance to the artists under his care.
I work for a company called Integrity Music, and they're focused on church music. And that's not something that I'd really ever been a part of professionally. I've just led worship at church, lead worship at Young Life stuff. I've never been a professional worship leader. But I care really deeply about the church, and I care really deeply about music. And I've had that experience many times of standing in a church and being like, this song that we're singing is stupid. I don't like this at all. You know, and wishing somebody could have just fixed that. Why are we singing this dumb line that, or, you know, just all the little things that'll drive you crazy or just.
Yeah.
And so to be in a position now where you can speak into that stuff at the headwaters is really wonderful. I love getting to be part of it.
In your attempts to craft material for the church that is not dumb, what is it that you feel like you and your artists are able to provide to the church that is sort of propelling worship in a different direction than like the other content that kind of drives you crazy?
Yeah, well, your question inherently gives us a lot more credit than we probably deserve. But there's a long and ancient history of people who have made beautiful music for the church that is rich and vibrant. And my goal is that the people that I work with, that the material we create is a part of that tradition. And so there's 3 questions I ask of most of our work. I ask, is it true? That means based on scripture and on the history of the Christian tradition, is what we're saying truthful? Often in search of a rhyme or in search of a moment that feels good, we will say something that's not quite true, which is way worse than if it's totally false. It's the things that aren't quite true that we get in our heads, and then you've had this experience, something in your life falls apart, you get a song in your head from church and it's not quite true, and it just makes you angry. And then when our friend dies from cancer, then it's, God, why did you lie to me? With God, all things are possible is not the full context of that verse, but there's a million songs written about that. The context of that scripture is when we are confronted with temptation, we are able to overcome the temptation because of Christ in us, because by God, all things are possible. So that scripture means that we don't have to sin when we're confronted with the opportunity to sin. It does not mean we're going to win this game or that my company is going to be more successful than your company, right? Those things aren't true. It's not going to rain on my wedding. And so it's when we take those things out of context, they can be really damaging because they tell us something about God that's not true. And then we get angry at God for not living up to these expectations that were never true in the first place. So that's the first question is this true? Number 2 is it useful? So for church music, and this is the hardest one for me because I like a lot of music and I like music that is challenging, and because I'm a musician, like there's nothing better than playing an Andrew Peterson show where you got songs in 7 and you're changing key all the time and you're like, you get done with a 2-hour show with him and you're just like, yeah, I just ran a marathon, but like most people that are coming to church on Sunday night, they're in their basement Saturday after they put their kids to bed practicing these songs to make sure they can play. Man, they got G, C, D, and E minor. And that's pretty much it. And it's like,
Yeah.
if it's not useful for them, then it's not actually serving the church, And that really, you can apply that to a lot of things, If the lullaby record you're doing if it gets so creative and it gets dark and moody, it's like, well, then kids are scared. That's not useful, So is it true? Is it useful? And then for me, maybe the most important is it kind? Because kindness is something that's in short supply, especially from our Christian media culture to the outside world. People come to church, people come to Christian media, Christian music, because they're hurting. That's 100% why people come to Christ, why people are coming to look for an encounter with Jesus, because they're hurting. And so when we are all proclaiming victory without referencing the hurt, if we're not creating space for the people who aren't fully on board, that feeling when you're standing there in a crowd of people and you're like, yeah, I'm on the outside for whatever reason.
Yeah.
Because what's happening there and what's happening in my heart, they've not made room for what's happening in my heart. They've not made room for my questions. They've not made room for my doubts. They've not made room for my fear. But the gospel has room for all those things. And so if what we're creating makes us look good or makes us feel good, but isn't kind to the person next to us or the person who comes in whose kid's on drugs or the person who comes in whose wife is in the hospital, like if what we're creating is not kind to them, then it's just cruel. And so many people leave the church because of that casual cruelty. Jesus's posture to people was always kindness to hurting people, to the people who really came seeking him. And when he gets angry at the religious people who are not kind to the people that are coming to Jesus. So it's our responsibility, especially if we're in positions of any kind of authority over the stuff that's coming out, to make sure that we're just inviting people in.
I'm actually wondering if any songs that you have worked on kind of come to mind where it kind of checked all of those boxes. Can you think of anything?
I mean, gosh, there's a lot of music that I've been a part of that has done those things well. And I don't think it's usually because of me. I think honestly, I tend to gravitate to people who do that well. And so then I end up being in the room when some of those things happen. For instance, we just had a song come out from our Artist Mission House, who I know are good friends of yours, Taylor Lenhart and Jess Ray.
Mm-hmm.
We just put a song out called Behold.
I love that song so much.
It's
Oh my
beautiful.
gosh. Yeah.
It's beautiful.
I love it.
And that song existed. It's like I get to go to her and say, hey, can I help you take this song to a bigger audience? And also, it didn't have a bridge. Let's put a bridge in there. She writes a bridge and the song's better.
Yeah.
It's just like insane. That's really my role, is just to kind of help amplify things that are wonderful. And I've loved sitting in the room with people when they hear that song for the first time and they just start crying, because that idea of behold, he's making all things new. We've been saying that for 2,000 years. There's nothing new about it, but it's ancient and it's true. And it's very useful. It's very kind. The empty filled, the wounded healed, the broken back together. Just gonna start crying immediately. The poor blessed, the weary rest. We will dance forever. The blinded see, the chained are free. The doubtful now believer. The outcast known, the orphan home. You are my redeemer. And then the chorus, so simple. Behold what love can do. Behold, he's making all things new.
Behold what love can do. Behold, behold, he's making all things new.
I mean, it's insane.
Then a congregation singing that together on a Sunday morning.
Yeah. Maybe the most fun part for me about this role is that you stand in the back of a room and you see people singing it. I experienced this with Leslie Jordan, who was a part of All Sons and Daughters and wrote that song, Great Are You, Lord. We were out in Hawaii at this YWAM base, and there were 1,000 people singing Great Are You, Lord, and Leslie and I are standing at the back of the room, and they had no idea that she was there. Most of them had no idea even who probably All Sons was. Like, it was just a song that was their own now. And like, that's just the most amazing thing, when people have taken those songs and they have no idea, and you just get to stand there and watch. Every little chapter of my life has led to what I'm doing now. And I'm sure this thing that I'm doing now will lead in big part to whatever I do next, because I think I'm old enough now to realize that what I'm doing now I'm not going to do forever. But I'm in this season now. And that's a perspective I didn't have earlier.
Well, that's the voice of experience.
Yeah. Just to recognize how fluid life is and that it doesn't do any good to hold tightly onto things. So it kind of feels like the more that we can learn to be flexible, the more we'll enjoy life.
Yeah, no matter what season we find ourselves in. I think the role that Andy is doing right now is so crucial, but it's one that a lot of people don't recognize because they see an artist up on stage and they just think,
They've done everything themselves.
yeah, they somehow got there on their own power. But the truth is, behind every musician is a team of people helping that musician do what they do best.
Yeah, make good decisions. They're offering wisdom from years and years of experience.
I think the longer that we move into your career, we're starting to realize that too, that it's not just our responsibility to make you awesome. It's all of these co-writers that we work with and all of these producers and all of these studio musicians and great graphic designers and illustrators. It's gathering amazing people to help you share your vision with an audience.
Yeah, it has been so fun to collaborate with other people who are incredibly talented. I feel like the songs that we've been writing the past several years have been our best songs so far. And it's because we're inviting people into the process. Like, I look back to some of the first songs that we wrote.
Where you were doing all the work?
Yeah, and they're not good.
Sorry.
They're a little embarrassing.
I mean, you were still nice.
Yeah, but I had a long way to go.
Yeah, it's funny that the secret is teamwork.
Yeah. Dave, you ready to fire up that time machine?
Oh, yeah. The Act 2 time machine where we go back to 2012.
Let's do it. Act 2, A Real Job. In 2012, a 33-year-old Andrew was invited to go on the road with one of the biggest names in Christian music. But even as he took that job as an electric guitar player, he could sense that change was in the air.
I remember when I got the call to play guitar for Stephen Curtis Chapman. I played with him for about a year and a half. And I remember when I got the call and went through the whole process of kind of joining that band, I remember saying to Allison, my wife, this is the last gig for me. This is the last like full-time like road gig I'm going to do. Because I just knew, like at that point, Stephen Curtis Chapman, he's a big artist. He's sold millions of records. I had a poster of him on my wall when I was a kid. And it's like, if I'm going to be any more successful as a guitar player, then I'm going to be in some country band, playing music I don't like, and never seeing my kids. So this is kind of the ceiling for a Christian music guitar player. And I have so much gratitude to Stephen. I'm so thankful that I got to work with him. But I kind of knew like there's nowhere else to go after this. My solo career had never gotten to the point where I could really make a full-time living off of it. Or if it did, it was like I didn't want to go do house shows forever. I just knew there was a different call in my life than doing that. And so I didn't think that season with Stephen would be as short as it was, but I'm thankful that I got to have it.
And while you were playing with Stephen, you had the Carnegie Hall experience. Is that right?
Yeah. And the thing about playing there, I mean, it was an amazing night. It was like in his book, it's the first chapter of his book, because that was for him this life retrospective of playing to this sold out crowd in New York City and playing songs from 30 years. And I was 6 feet from him singing harmony. You know, it was like, that's it. Like, I'm never going to top that experience as a guitar player who loves this kind of music. And I just knew it. It was like, and it was a perfect night. I missed 2 notes. I could tell you what they were. Like, just everything went great. And it was just this magical experience. And so after that, it was like, okay, if I ever had a checklist of things to do, like I think I've checked them off in this category. And so I need to write a new list. It was kind of what I left that experience with. And I remember walking on stage that night at Carnegie, and I checked my bank balance right before I walked on stage and knew that I had like $200 in the bank. It was like, this is not sustainable. You know,
Wow.
If this is as good as it gets in this world and I can't make a living, then I got to figure something else out. So pretty quickly after, I started kind of asking around, just, I don't know, talking with friends about, hey, what did you do after this? Or are you going to get out of this? You know, because all my friends are in that world. And I remember I said a comment to Josh Wilson, because we were on a tour together and we are neighbors. We were driving to a bus together. And I said, there used to be jobs for people like me who've like done everything in the business, but never made $1 million. Like, we end up becoming A&R guys. And I was like, but nobody does that anymore. And he was like, dude, they're actually hiring for that at my label.
Can you just, for people who aren't familiar with industry jargon, explain what A&R is?
Yes. I've done it for 6 years now. I'm still trying to figure out what it is that I do. It stands for artist and repertoire. So the person at a record company that deals with the artists and their songs. So it's kind of got 3 or 4 main components. You're the primary relationship between the artist and the label. So you have to be able to kind of speak both languages. You got to be able to speak songwriter and also speak like P&L sheets and budgets. And you're a talent scout. So you're going looking for new artists to bring on, and then you're mentoring and discipling. Particularly in my world, you're discipling. And then you're shepherding that specific album to make sure it's got the best songs and the right people are playing on the right songs, the right producers are working on the right songs. You're kind of quality control and relationship managing that whole process. And in any given week, I might end up kind of helping rewrite a chorus with one artist and then randomly play guitar on another record. And then this morning I was a mastering engineer because we didn't have time to get to the real mastering engineer, so I faked it. You're just kind of basically looking at this artist and their needs and going, what random things aren't being done? Let me do them. And then in the big picture, how am I helping them to figure out their story so that they can tell their story the best way possible? And that's really the heart of it, is like, it's the sitting down for coffee and the walking around the lake. And then when people are sharing songs with me, I can say, hey, I think this thing that you're writing about here is not exactly what you were talking about the other day. Let's figure out what the disconnect is and make sure that the songs you're writing, the records you're making, are as true to your story as they can be.
So you had this conversation with Josh Wilson. He said there's this position available. And then what happened?
Well, so I emailed his A&R guy, who's the head of that department, and we went out for coffee. And 2 days later, I had a job offer to be an A&R guy. And I was 35. I just turned 35. And I'd never had an actual job in my life.
Wow.
So like I'd been a paper boy. I mean, I've had a job since I was 12. Like I'm a small town farm kid. Like I've never stopped working, but I've never had like a job with an office. And so, man, it was a trip. It was at once really exciting because I was a part of this as the biggest company in our industry, and you get to go to LA and go to these cool parties but you're from the Christian division, so you stand like way in the corner and they're just like not actually in the party. You're kind of watching the party, if we're being completely honest, you know? But it looked cool, and it feels cool to look cool. Even when in that job, I knew I was like doggy paddling, like could not keep my head above water in the role that it was. And it took me a couple of years to realize what the job really was. And more than that, I remember the first probably 3 days in the job, and on Facebook or Instagram or something, somebody posted a picture, and it was like Andy Gullahorn and Andrew Peterson and Randall Goodgame sitting on Andy Gullahorn's porch writing songs. And I was like, oh man, if I hadn't taken that job, I'd have probably been there. And it took me a while to make peace with the fact that my place in my community had changed because of my job. And over the years, both I've learned how to navigate that better, and I'm also at a place now where I have a lot more freedom to be a part of that community. But at the time, it was like, oh, it was really hard to have a separation there. You know, whenever you're going to go through a big change like that, like it's not just that you change what you're doing from 9 to 5 on a Monday through Friday. It's like when you're shifting from the kind of work you do, especially when you get a lot of your identity from the work you do, which for better or worse, I had done and most creative professionals have done. You know, I learned a ton. It was a great experience. I learned so much, and I'm really proud of a lot of the work that I got to do there. At the end of the day, at that first company, both I was unprepared for the role and I was not the right fit for the role. I think some of that's because like that place is built really for chart-topping #1 Christian radio singles, and that's never been a thing that really mattered to me. And then some of it is, like I said, just kind of learning the job, and I think they needed somebody who knew that job a little better than I did. But that's all fine. The hard thing for me was that I didn't see it coming. A lot of projects that I'd worked on had just kind of turned corners, and we had some successes. And so I kind of went into a meeting thinking, people are going to tell me I did a great job. And that was, you're done.
Ugh.
So all of a sudden I was 37, I had 3 kids and a mortgage, and I was at this spot where all the artists that I used to play for, Steven, Andrew Peterson, like everybody had new guitar players. They didn't need me back in that role. I had let the rent go on my studio. I didn't have a place to make records. I'd sold my speakers. I didn't have the ability to jump into my old job. And in hindsight, I can see that I actually took the next available A&R position in our industry. And it took 2 years for that role to open.
Wow.
So there wasn't another job to jump into. And so I spent a few months kind of walking around Radnor Lake, just walking out my severance package, which is very short, and just going like, all right, God, what am I supposed to do? What am I supposed to do? And, you know, I had a few months of awkward meetings with people trying to find, you know, applying for jobs I didn't really want, and then being relieved when I didn't get them. And then kind of awkwardly trying my hands at, well, maybe I'll do this, maybe I'll do that. And it was after probably 6 months of that kind of stuff, I remember feeling, I'm not a person who feels the word of the Lord a lot. Like there are probably 3 times that I can say I felt like God told me to do something. And I felt like I had this very strong sense of you need to write songs again. And I was like, probably said audibly like, well, that's stupid because I need money. Writing songs doesn't make me any money. I've tried that for a long time. And it kind of didn't occur to me that then you make records and then you sell the records and then you go on the road and you make money. And I was like, oh yeah, I did that for a long time. But in my head, I was like, that seems wasteful. And I have a dear friend named Paul, who you guys know well, who lives a kind of catty corner to me. And I had all these schemes in my head, all these ideas. You guys know me. I'm always a guy with a lot of schemes and ideas. And I think that's why we're friends, because you guys do too. And I went over to Paul's house and I just said, hey, can I just like talk for an hour or two and just say all this stuff out loud? Because it's all in my head. When it's in my head, I don't know what's a good idea and what's a bad idea and what's stupid and what's brilliant. And so I sat there with Paul for probably 2 hours. He probably asked me 3 questions and I just talked. I just got it out of my head. And after that, it was kind of clear of like, oh yeah, these 2 ideas are really stupid. This is a good idea I can't do anything about because I don't have the resources. But actually, I should probably finish these songs and make a record. And this podcast idea is probably a pretty good idea. So I made a record and I made a podcast. And the podcast was about all those questions I had. It's called The Pivot, talking to people about what happens when life doesn't work the way it used to. Because that was what was happening to me. And I honestly just needed to hear people say, you're not crazy and you're going to be okay.
Yeah.
You know, because I listened to a lot of podcasts of people who succeeded. You know, how I built this. Here's how I started Southwest Airlines. Like, well, that's great. I'm unemployed. That's not encouraging to me right now, you know? Like you can get fired up, like, I'm going to go do this thing. And then you give it 4 hours and then you're back in the fetal position. And so I needed to hear different stories than I felt like were out there. But I knew there were people that had those stories. And so I was thankful there again for people who were willing to share their stories with me. And it turns out a lot of other people resonated with that as well. And so I started doing that podcast and I made a record about these experiences, which, you know, was able to kickstart and then do a house show tour, and which again, I didn't want to do forever, but turns out it was really great to do it again for a few months, and the lights were on and there was food on the table. And the podcast, because I'd interviewed some people around town, and at that point there weren't a lot of podcasts here in town, it meant that everybody in our industry that I had felt so ashamed in front of were now looking at my picture on their phone because everybody was listening to the podcast. And, you know, like probably 4 days after that podcast came out, I started getting calls again about writing songs for people and playing guitar on records, and shows started coming. Like literally like that kind of put my career back on track.
Can you talk about the Painted Desert record? I feel like there are some really important songs on that record, and you said some things that you really needed to get off of your chest. And so I'm just wondering if you can speak towards it a little bit.
Yeah, well, thanks, Dave. That record for me, was 100% therapy. If anyone ever comes up to me now and says, I really love that record, I usually say, I'm so sorry. There's something in your life that's drawing you to records like that. That means you're in a season where you need a record like that. I think we all have those seasons, and they're never fun, but they're often very fruitful seasons. I got into Westerns about 4 or 5 years ago, and so people are always, you know, getting stuck in the desert, and then there's always some kind of good story that comes out of that. And the Painted Desert specifically, out by where you guys used to live, you know, you stay out there too long and you're going to die, but it's really beautiful. And that's kind of where the title came from. But it's a lot of kind of wrestling with scripture, and it's kind of holding those things up and saying, okay, God, did you mean this? Because I don't feel it right now. I never really made a record like that before. And I'm definitely feeling the itch now to make another record that's kind of a chapter on beyond that. Because kind of one of the pivotal moments of that record, to me at least emotionally, is the song called The Year of the Locust, which references this scripture in the book of Joel, chapter 2, where these locusts come and they eat everything, and then an army comes and they burn everything that's left. And there's this weeping and gnashing of teeth. It's very Old Testament. And then eventually it says, and the Lord heard the cries of his people. He will redeem the years the locusts have eaten.
Take comfort and rest in the heart of an uncivil war, and you're taking a beating. Blood red on your chest. He will restore the years the locusts have eaten. The locusts have eaten.
I needed that. I probably said that to myself 800 times a day. He will redeem the years the locusts have eaten. And so I wrote that song as kind of just another way to kind of get that mantra, get that in my head. And so now it's like, now I feel like I want to tell a story of what it looks like as God redeems those years.
Yeah. Well, and it seems like from my perspective, the podcast and the album is exactly that. They're both examples of redemption and something beautiful coming out of that loss of the job. But as somebody who both enjoys the record and enjoys your podcast, like, I'm so thankful for that content. And I kind of don't think either would exist if you didn't go through that loss.
Well, thank you. And 100%. And, it's like the job, honestly, I feel like the job is an easy thing to kind of talk about. But the truth is that was more of a symptom of a lot of other things that were going on in my own heart, things I needed to deal with personally, weights that I was carrying from history, different broken relationships, some of which have been healed, some of which have not. I feel like that was kind of the moment where I all of a sudden was made to kind of face those things. Or I guess I was given the opportunity to face those things. And so, the losing of the job was honestly like, that's going to happen at some point, and everybody goes through it, and you're going to be fine. But what it taught me about my own identity, about my own priorities, that's the stuff that I needed to start learning and that I wouldn't have done if I was still in that position.
Can you also speak to the song Beautiful Places? You're contemplating your mortality, you're contemplating
legacy.
Yeah. Had that been an idea prior to this season and you had always wanted to write it, or what?
What was the inspiration?
I did have this realization a few years ago that my kids are going to one day spend time with my work, whether it's the stuff that I write or the stuff that I'm a part of. There will come a season when they no longer live with me. I may no longer be alive, but if no one else listens to my music, at some point my kids will, because they're going to wonder who I was and what that means about who they are. That changed everything for me as far as the kind of music that I want to create, the kind of material that I want to create. And so this song is a very specific, I call it a message in a bottle. Someday they'll find this and it's going to hit them differently than it does now. And from now on, most of my songs, really, they're just going to be messages in bottles.
I want you to find your own sacred spaces, where you go when you need to remember what truth and freedom and grace is. So grab some life insurance money, call your sisters and cross things off the list. Scatter my ashes, beautiful places. It's the last gift I can give you, beautiful places.
I just love that song. I was fortunate enough to go to Andrew's CD release concert for that album. And I remember looking over my shoulder at Andrew's wife, Allison, as he was singing that song. He got to the line that said, grab some life insurance money, call your sisters and cross some things off the list. And I just remember seeing tears welling up in her eyes. And then tears welled up in my eyes. One day we're not going to be here. But this beautiful location that's special to me will now be special to you as well.
Yeah, that song gives me chills pretty much every time.
JJ, are you ready to go back to like 1995?
I am so ready, Dave.
Oh, yeah.
Does that mean I need to get like my Stussy shirt?
Yeah, and your Doc Marten boots.
Yes, I really wanted the Doc Marten sandals. Could I have those instead?
Yeah, just do a workout because those things weigh like 10 pounds each.
I know. It's kind of crazy. Also, we have to give a special shout out to Ben Rector for the title of this final chapter. This is Act 1, You Can't Make Old Friends. Andrew takes us all the way back to the beginning and how one act of kindness shaped the rest of his life.
When I was a kid, we didn't have much. Times were tight for the Osenga family. And I got into music kind of through my friend, Mark, who could play guitar a little bit. And so he taught me a little of that. He could go to guitar lessons and then he would teach me on his guitar what he learned. And I would then take his guitar from him and try to learn it. Eventually, my parents saw that I was getting into guitar and they bought me one that they had no money. And it was like an $80 piece of junk, but they bought me what they could. And I played that thing like crazy. And like the strings were a half inch off the fretboard. I mean, it was impossible to play. And I started playing at youth group and playing at my Young Life Club. And it was my sophomore year of high school at a Christmas party for our youth group. All my friends had pooled their money and bought me a guitar.
What?
It was a Sigma, which is like a knockoff Martin.
You still have it?
It's this one right here.
Oh my goodness.
And it's like, it's pretty beat up now. It's probably not in tune. It's high strung now, but it's made its way on a bunch of records. But, it's probably like $400 or $500 or something. But at the time, man, you're a sophomore in high school in 1995. That's a ton of money.
What do you remember about that? Like, was it a surprise?
Yeah, it was a total surprise. It was a total surprise. It was some kind of like gift exchange, like a white elephant gift exchange. And then I can't remember how they rigged it, but they rigged it so that the last present was this guitar. And there was a card with it that everybody signed that I still have in the case. It was like my girlfriend at the time, who's now like married to one of the other guys who was in that room, And, some people I've not talked to since, and some people that I still see every time I go back home. But the point is that like everything that's happened in my career and in my life, really it runs along the rails of my friendships and my relationships, is that like none of my music career could have happened without this guitar because my friends gave it to me.
Wow.
And that they called something out in me that I longed for but didn't really believe was true.
I feel like part of that equation, you wouldn't acknowledge it naturally. Like, in order to buy your friend a guitar, he has to be a really great person. Like, he has to be someone worth buying a guitar for. You know what I mean? You must have been like a really amazing kid to hang out with and believe in for your friends to all do that.
I highly doubt that. But I'm thankful. If you're into the Enneagram, I'm a 4. I always feel like I don't fit in anywhere. And so things like that always mean just the world to me. And, honestly, I could look back at the last 25 years since and tell you a million stories that feel the same way. And that's kind of why I am where I am, and thankful to be in a place where I get to spend my time calling what's great out about other people.
When you first left Illinois, how old were you?
I was 18. I signed a publishing deal when I was a senior in high school, and I didn't know what that meant until I was probably 30, and it was too late. But I wanted to be an English teacher, so I came to Nashville, to Belmont, as an English major so that I could become an English teacher. And then I got a record deal my freshman year and derailed my career, and it, never went back. So yeah, and I met a lot of the people that I still work with now. I met that year. I met Andy Colahorn and Jill Phillips and Sandra McCracken and Kason Cooley.
Were they all Belmont students?
We were all Belmont students together.
What an amazing year.
Yeah, and I work with all those people still.
And you were already in the Normals?
So the Normals was my high school band, which had a different name. We were from a town called Normal, Illinois. That eventually, Case and Cooley was a part of that. And I was a terrible guitar player. My best friend since 7th grade was a great guitar player. He taught me everything that I knew. And he was always, and still is, 1,000 times better than I am. But when our band ended, he got a job and he started a company and moved back to Illinois. And I had dropped out of college. My wife and I had just gotten married. I didn't have a band. I didn't have a job. I was actually still under a contract, so I couldn't make any new music. And the opportunity with Caedmon's was kind of starting to come open. And I had this realization, it was very clear, like, okay, I have to get good at guitar. Because if I can be good at this, I can make a living with this for a while. And I didn't realize how fortuitous that would be, that I would end up in a community of singer-songwriters, and I was the only electric guitar player, which is kind of how I made a living for a long time.
Wow.
I wasn't the best. I was just the guy who was there, you know?
You were the guy who could do more than they could.
Yeah, exactly. I spent a lot of time being that guy. I was the first guy with a studio and the guy who had an electric guitar. And for a long time, people thought that meant I was good at those things. Just meant I had them.
Yeah, if you can't be the best, then be the only one.
That's exactly it. Oh. So I started I took a couple lessons from a guy who taught kind of professionals, sort of helped them find the holes in their thinking, and kind of dove in as a guitar player and just practiced a lot and kind of fibbed my way into a couple gigs where I had to be good enough. And then eventually I kind of was. In about 2005, my wife and I joined this neighborhood fellowship group from a church that we were a part of at the time. And it was about 6 couples, I think, who lived in our neighborhood. And that group of people, particularly the guys in that group, have become just the deepest friends of mine for 15 years now. And so there have been a number of times where those guys in particular, and probably Kaysen before that when we were roommates, they were people that I could call. We could go for a walk because I am a verbal processor. And so I think that's why I'm a songwriter, because it's kind of scratches the same itch. You put these ideas down on paper and you look at them and you go, I don't think that. Or, oh man, I need some help because that's not a good thing to think. But I don't know I think it until I say it.
Yeah.
And Paul has definitely been one of those people who's been very kind and gracious to me in creating space, not just for me. He does that for a lot of people. He holds space for people really, really well who need a place to process. And, you can hire people to do that for you. And I'm thankful for some of those people in my story too. But I'm thankful that a lot of those people have just been good friends. And I hope that I do that. I feel like in my role now, particularly, I actually do that for a lot of people as well. And I feel like I'm able to do that decently because I've learned from people who do it really well. I'd wanted to be a musician my whole life. As a kid, that's all I did in high school, was just sit in my room and play guitar and try to learn everything about this world. And so when you get to do it, it's amazing. And when you get to do it at a high level and you're working with your heroes, and it was just such a high. But like I said, it's like you kind of check those things off and it's like, well, that's not the reason I exist. That's not the goal of my life. That was just some goals I had. And I think once you've kind of gotten to that point where you have to do that personal homework of what are my goals for my job and what are my actual goals as a human? At the end of the day, it doesn't matter how many times I play a big show if my kids hate me or are really dysfunctional. It's like they're my goal, like raising good children, loving my wife well, being a good member of my community, being there for my friends. If there's any through line for my story, it really probably is just the sort of relationship side of it. I mean, it's like, how did I get to play with Stephen Chris Chapman? My friends. How did I get my job? My friends. How am I still married to my wife? My friends. Like, how do I still believe that Jesus loves me? My friends. You know, music has always been obviously a part. That's what I do, and it's one of the languages that I speak. But that is absolutely the biggest thread that goes through my life.
Man, hearing Andrew's story really inspires me to want to be a better friend. Just to know the impact that I could possibly make on someone else's life is pretty incredible.
Yeah, it's amazing how a small act of kindness can have those kind of ripple effects. Well, listeners, we've been through all 3 acts backwards, but we're not quite finished yet. It's time for our final segment of the show. It's called Let's Rewind the Tape!
You ready for this?
I was born ready.
Okay. Andrew is now embracing his role as a guide as he leads artists through their experience with the often overwhelming and confusing music industry.
And the way he does his job now is greatly informed by his experience wandering through a confusing time of his own.
And it's also informed by his time spent working for another record label that wasn't necessarily the best fit for him.
But it was a stable position that allowed him to step off the road for the first time in his life.
And his career on the road would not have been possible without the friends who supported him along the way.
And the friends who believed in him enough
To buy him a guitar.
I want some friends like that.
He's had some pretty awesome friends in his life.
I already have 2 guitars too.
So you're set on guitars?
I mean, you can only play one at a time.
That's so true. Unless you learn to play with both of your feet.
Oh,
This is so dumb. I'm going to stop here.
I'm so glad that we had a chance to sit down with Andrew. If you want to spend more time with him, you can listen to so many episodes of his podcast, The Pivot. You can find it at everybodypivots.com.
This episode of Instrumental was produced by me, JJ Heller.
And me, Dave Heller, with additional editing by Kyle Henson
Our theme music is my song, Big Love, Small Moments.
that I helped write.
To find out more about me, listen to more of my songs, or watch my music videos, please visit jjheller.com. That's 2 letter J's, HELLER.com.
We'll be back next week with another episode of Instrumental.
So be sure to subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts.